Today for our Sunday Gospel, we've seen Jesus healing 10 lepers, but only one came back. And I think that often we rush to judge the lepers and to condemn the lepers for not coming back. And sometimes we precipitate in condemning the lepers, those 9 that just stayed in Jerusalem. But today in this homily, I want to make a case for the 9 lepers. And I want to show you that they're not as bad as you think they are. It's true that the Samaritan got everything right. But the other 9, at least they got the first part right. So think about the scene. They run into Jesus, and from a distance, they start yelling, "Lord, have pity on us." Remember that there's another scene in the gospel where a leper requires and asks Jesus for help. Perhaps you remember the scene, and the leper says, "Lord, if you want, you can clean me." And Jesus says, "I want, be cleaned," and he touches the leper. This time, Jesus doesn't go touching all the 9 lepers, but rather Jesus responds in an enigmatic way. He says, "Go to the priests." Perhaps the lepers were going like, "Couldn't you touch us and let's just fix this right now?" But Jesus says, "Go to the priest." Why does he say, "Go to the priest"? Well, he says, "Go to the priest," because in those days, if you were a leper and you were healed, the one who certified the healing was the priest, like a doctor, right, who gave you the certificate and said, "You're free of COVID." The priest had to say, "You're leper free." So why is this interesting? Because Jesus makes them walk towards the priest before they are healed. He asks of them an act of faith. He is saying, "I want you to walk all the way to Jerusalem to be certified by the priest that you're healed," but they weren't healed yet. So in a way, Jesus is putting their faith to the test before he grants them the miracle. And you know what's super interesting? That there are many other moments in the gospel where Jesus does the same thing. Before he grants a miracle, he puts the person to test in his faith. He asks him to do something that could be embarrassing or strange or really like almost exposed to ridicule. Do you remember any other passage of the gospel where Jesus demands an act of faith before granting the miracle? Do you remember? When I have these questions and I don't remember, you know who always asks and gives me all the answers? AI. So I went to AI and I said, "AI, what other passages of the gospel does Jesus demand someone doing something before making the miracle?" And AI told me, great answers. I promise that is the only help I got from AI for this homily. For example, when Jesus says to Peter, "Go back with your boat into the Sea of Galilee," he's asking me an act of faith. Peter had been the whole night there. He got nothing. And then Jesus says, "Go back." He was exposed to ridicule, like the other fishermen looking at Peter going back again into the sea, like, "What are you doing? We've already been out there." I'll give you another one. When Martha and Mary lost their brother Lazarus, Jesus goes to Bethany and he says, "Remove the rock from the tomb." And they go like, "Lord, he's been dead for 4 days. We're going to remove it and it's going to smell." But Jesus invites people to do an act of faith before he grants a miracle. And all 10 lepers took the risk of going to Jerusalem and making that long walk because they've put their faith in the word of Jesus. So brothers and sisters, let me ask you this question. Where in your life Is God inviting you to do an act of faith so that He can show you His power? In what sense in your own life you're called to make the walk to the Jerusalem before you're healed? In what ways is God inviting you, like Peter, to go back into the sea, although you already tried to do that? But it's also true that the 9 lepers didn't get everything right. Only the Samaritan got 2 out of 2 in the exam because he came back. And I know that normally what we say is like, oh, the Samaritan is the grateful one, the other ones are ungrateful. And I know that's true, but I think there's something more to it. When the Samaritan comes back, he doesn't just come back and say to the Lord, well, thank you for this great miracle. He prostrates before the Lord. He surrenders before the Lord. He kneels before the Lord. And you know what's that revealing? That this Samaritan is putting himself at the service of the Lord. So look at the difference. For the 9 other lepers, their story with Jesus was done once they got the miracle. For the Samaritan, his story with Jesus was just beginning, because he came back to his service. And this makes me think about a beautiful example. For some people, God is like a mechanic. Please fix my problem. Fix my problem. Lord, fix my problem. I have this problem. I want you to be in charge of fixing these problems. But for other people, God is a pilot. Lord, be in charge of my car and you drive it. For the 9 lepers, God was a car mechanic. Once God fixed the problem of their leprosy, they're like, great, problem fixed, I'll continue with my life. But for only 1 leper, he came back to say, Lord, I don't want you to be a mechanic. I want you to be the pilot of my car, and I want you to be in charge of my car. Let me ask you a question. Did you ever meet someone who received an incredible miracle from God and then never came back to church? Did you ever meet someone who in their moment of distress was like, Lord, help me, please. The miracle was granted, and see you in 30 years? Jesus invites each one of us not to look him as our mechanic to whom we bring our problems, but to make him the pilot to whom we surrender. So, brothers and sisters, number 1, what's the first lesson? The first lesson is sometimes God invites us to have faith before he reveals his power. Sometimes he invites us to do an act of faith before he grants us even more faith. Like Peter, like Martha and Mary, like the lepers. Question for you. Where is he inviting you to make an act of faith so that he can reveal his power? The second lesson is God is not meant to be a mechanic who solves your problems. God is meant to be the one who drives your car. In your life, is God a mechanic or is God the pilot?